Excellent. So now we are ready to introduce Parker Nancollas and James Taylor. Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you. All right, so I'm Parker Nancollas. I am the FinOps practice lead for North America at SoftwareONE. Previously a FinOps practitioner, I actually used to work with James. And yeah, excited to be here, excited to be at FinOps X again.
Yeah, James Taylor. I am the Cloud Business Architect of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which basically means no, I do not sing, I don't play the guitar, I don't even pretend to. However, what I do is try and remove all of the non-technical barriers to cloud adoption for our various portfolio teams, which of course wraps around FinOps. And I'm just here to look pretty so that Parker can say he opened for James Taylor today.
All right, so our topic today is around workload optimization, but it's specifically the process around tracking and reporting on the opportunities and the results we get from workload optimization.
How do you quantify the value thereof?
So we're going to talk through, we're going to focus on, I mean, we don't have all the answers. So we'd love to hear from everybody after if you've got experiences with some of these things. It's clicking by itself, but we're gonna talk through some challenges we've come across. And
do you need me to hold that for you, Parker?
I'm not touching it.
Joe?
We're going to talk through some challenges we've encountered. And yeah, here's one. We'll work through this one too. As well as some solutions that we've seen work, some solutions that we're working through. So very focused on real world experiences that we've seen work as kind of a starting point. We'd love to continue the conversation after this.
Yeah,
so.
Evolving, developing experiences too.
All right, everybody should know this. This is the point of FinOps, maximizing business value. So it's not just cost optimization, but that's a big part of it. And that's one thing we can do to maximize business value. And we see that here. So when we look at the State of FinOps survey, you can see the top two here have to do with the top priorities for FinOps teams. The first two have to do with cost savings. So, and then specifically, the top one is reducing waste. It's workload optimization. And so if you look at the agenda, which obviously you all looked at the agenda, you can see there's a lot of, for this conference, there's a lot of breakout sessions on this topic of workload optimization. Again, we're not going to talk about how to optimize workloads. That's not the topic of this one, but it's when we are doing workload optimization, how do we track the opportunities? How do we report on the benefit we're getting from the actions that we're taking? That's something that, while it seems like it should be simple, it's a challenge we've both run into actually implementing. And there's a few reasons that make workload optimization challenging.
Yeah, before we jump into those challenges, does anybody think that workload optimization is easy? Wow, not a single hand. My observation is that workload optimization is difficult. And in fact, it's so difficult that a lot of practitioners that I've talked to have said, I've just given up on workload optimization. And usually the reason they tell me they've given up on workload optimization is because engineers just don't listen to me. They don't care what I have to say. And I see a couple of smiles, chuckles, and shaking heads. It sounds like many of you have had that same experience. I would like to challenge us all as practitioners to shift our perspective and say, maybe it's not really about engineers not listening. Maybe it is that workload optimization is hard. And there's a variety of reasons why workload optimization is harder than perhaps rate optimization is for many of us. These are some of those reasons, or at least the 4 challenges that we wanted to focus on today. First of all, the decentralized nature of rate optimization. Workload optimization. Every time I say that wrong, shout, clap, do something to get me set straight. There will be a prize afterwards based on the number of errors I make. I don't know about you guys, but I have yet to have an engineering team that has said, James, here's credentials for our GitHub repository. why don't you just optimize our workloads for us, commit it, push it, we trust you. Not a single team has let me do that. I always have to work with them, and that decentralization adds a lot of complexity, a layer of complexity to it. Also, if we look at just the general concepts of reporting, measuring, tracking progress, rate optimization is quite tangible. It's relatively easy to see the impact it's having. Not so much the case when I'm measuring savings or tracking progress with workload optimization, even though on the surface it seems very tangible because I got this whole list of recommendations that are talking about very specific things, right? And so that's a big point of what we want to talk about today. And then there's also kind of the hidden inaccuracies. I'm sure all of you have had an engineer say, well, that's only looking at CPU, and it's about a lot more than CPU, right? And so whether or not it's technically feasible to implement an optimization becomes another thing. And so these are the four, I guess, challenges that we wanted to focus on today. We know there's a bunch more, and we'd love to hear about them later, but those are the ones that we chose to focus on in the limited time we've got today.
All right, so starting with that first one, the managing a decentralized process. So as we know, rate optimization should be, and the best practice would be in most cases that it's centralized. So you've got, in an ideal world, a centralized FinOps team who is looking at spend across the organization and making decisions on commitments that we're making, reserved instances, savings plans. And the FinOps practitioner would have access to that data, and we know what's happening. So we can run reports, we can see what reservations exist, we can see what utilization is. It's easy to get that data, and we're very aware of what's happening. So even if it's not an ideal world where maybe some commitments are happening outside of the FinOps team, we see those. We know what's happening. We can see details about that in the cloud billing data. When it comes to workload optimization, it's very different. So we might have initiatives that we're doing as a FinOps practice. We might be reaching out to teams and saying, hey, you've got some idle resources, you should turn these off. But they might be doing that already. They might be doing other things that we're not aware of. And if we're talking about maximizing the business value of what we're spending in cloud, we need to know how we're getting better. We want to be aware of what's happening. Even if we're not the ones pushing it, we want to be aware of if there's a team who's taking actions to optimize. And so that's what makes it hard from the practitioner perspective, is we don't necessarily always have insight into that, and so we might be missing some of the actions that are happening.
I think another thing that decentralization makes it difficult for is because if we go back to the historical centralized model of finance, we have finance experts, and that's all they do, and they focus on finance. When we get into this workload optimization space, a common theme is an engineer who says, I've never had to worry about the cost before in my life. And so it's a whole new world that's getting introduced to a whole another very large group of people as well through that decentralization.
So this is a solution that one of the organizations we worked with implemented that worked for them. So this is a solution that we've seen success with, which is to have goals. It's interesting that often we do workload optimization activities, but they're not really aligned to a goal. There's not necessarily a strategy other than save, optimize. That's the strategy. And so what this organization did is they had two different levels of strategies. So with a group that involved teams, CCOE, FinOps, finance, architecture, they came up with an enterprise vision that kind of was less so specific goals, but more so guidelines, we'll say, or vision.
Kind of like the Pirates Code, got it.
And then the FinOps team went and worked with other individual teams within the organization to come up with team-specific goals. So looking at your spend, what resources are you spending the most money on? Where are the greatest opportunities? What are you already working on? What optimization activities are you already working through? And coming up with specific goals that for each team that align with that enterprise vision, so that we actually have something that we can track, and we'll talk through strategies that have worked as far as the tracking. But step one is, what are we even tracking to? We need to have an understanding of what that goal is. So this is something that this organization put in practice, and it was very effective because it went from feeling very scattered as far as here's a bunch of activities that a bunch of different people are doing to, and from the FinOps practitioner perspective, they didn't know, it was hard to even know what report to build, right? So getting the right data is the next step, but the first step was even what data am I getting? What am I trying to show? This made that very clear. This is what we're trying to show. So they had very specific goals. These are the top resources. This is where we see a lot of waste. We have specific goals to improve efficiency in these areas, set those goals, and now we know exactly what report we're building. We know what we're wanting to track.
So I think one of the comments I would make about this is this paints kind of two pictures, a very top-down approach from one end and a bottom-up approach from the other. And one of the experiences I've had, and this may be unique to my organization, is that there's this whole middle layer that when I take these top-down and bottom-up approaches, often gets missed. And then they're the ones that are making the decisions, and so the resources don't get properly allocated, even though I've got a low-level team that set a goal and a high-level vision that's driving that. So I think it's important when we're setting these multi-level optimization goals to make sure we're going all the way through the organization. We've connected all the dots from the top and the bottom and not left somebody in the middle out of the discussion.
And I just wanted to briefly mention as we're talking through these things, these are two things to keep in mind. So 80-20 rule, when we're coming up with goals, it should not be every single little thing we could do to optimize. The goals, there should be specific targets based on what the biggest opportunities are today. So what things can I do today that have the biggest impact? Eventually, yeah, we'd love to get to everything. And if we a year from now, from kind of that first set of goals, we're much more optimized, maybe we start drilling down. But don't try to do everything at once, and then inform, optimize, operate, kind of circling through that as you increase your maturity. It's not going to be perfect from day one. So when we talk about kind of setting those initial goals and that vision and having the different levels of that, it doesn't have to be all figured out from day one. It's where do we start, and then how do we mature it from there. All right, now getting into probably the much more exciting part of this. How do we actually track and report on what we're doing when it comes to workload optimization? So one of the challenges with workload optimization is when we look at, we'll probably reference rate optimization versus workload optimization a bunch of times in this, but with rate optimization, if we're looking at buying a reserved instance, what we're looking at is aggregated usage details. We're looking at aggregated hourly usage over a period of time to see what types of commitments we should make. If we are doing workload optimization, we're looking at very specific resource level data, something like this where we're showing what we've provisioned compared to what utilization is over time. But it's an individual resource that we're looking at here. And that makes things complicated because it's the resource level data can change in a lot of different ways. So on the one hand, resource IDs can change. If something gets turned off and rebuilt, the resource ID can change. Resource names change. Resource utilization changes. So a graph might look like this today, and tomorrow it might be fully utilized. We really don't, we don't know. And from a FinOps practitioner perspective, whoever owns this resource probably is very aware of what it's used for, what the future expectations are, but a FinOps practitioner isn't going to know that for thousands and thousands and thousands of resources. And so what we've seen a lot of organizations do is try to track workload optimization at this level and try to track. So you use it, whatever tool you're using, you pull up data that looks like this and you say, hey, this thing could be right-sized. And then you try to track you make that recommendation, and then you're tracking to that specific resource ID, and you're trying to do that across hundreds or thousands of resource IDs, and it's challenging. Now, that's good data to have. It's not that we shouldn't be doing that at all, but this is an example of something that there's a specific example this is referencing, but we've seen this a bunch of different times and across a bunch of organizations, which is So this was an organization who was in Azure and had a bunch of idle VMs. And the FinOps team was going through and identifying these idle VMs, pushing those out to the right owners of those resources and saying, hey, shut these down. And they were shutting them down. What was interesting, though, is as we looked across, and I think those are supposed to say 2023, but as we looked across months, the total potential waste, if we look at all the opportunities for idle resources, didn't actually change. And the question became, didn't we push a bunch of these out and they turned them off? Like we were tracking it. This resource ID was idle. We told them about it. They turned it off. So you're saying that we haven't saved anything, and I don't know what the reason is. Again, the FinOps practitioner can't know what every single resource ID means. But that's what we found is though they were taking action, though they thought they were getting results, nothing really changed, and that's where we don't know what the story was really. We don't know if some of these resources on the kind of the old versus the new might be the same things that were just turned off and have a new resource ID, or it just might be that the other ones weren't idle anymore, and now there's new idle ones. It might not even be that they got turned off. There might not be recommendations for those resources anymore because they just started being utilized. So trying to track at that resource level is not something that we've seen work. What we've seen work better is tracking workload optimization at an aggregated level. So looking at total idle resource spend and tracking that over time. Because at the end of the day, I don't really care if I turned off 5 idle resources if next month there's 5 more. Am I really improving the business value of our spend if one idle resource is replaced with another?
No, you're not. Sorry, I thought that was a group question.
No, you just looked like you were going to say something a minute ago. So that's what this organization did, and this is kind of the one step of it, and then James will kind of take it a level deeper. But what they did is instead of the resource level data still matters. I still need to go to an application owner and say this is the resource. So we need that. But from a tracking perspective, it doesn't matter to me if it's one resource ID or another resource ID. What I need to know is what that means to the business. Are we actually making an impact? Are we actually improving? And so what this organization did was started to track those opportunities at an aggregated level, and that was a lot more beneficial. The interesting thing to see was they were not doing quite as well as they thought they were. When they were looking at resource specifics, they thought they were doing better. When we started looking at it at an aggregated level, we realized there was a lot more to do.
Thank you. I have the power now. I feel good about that. Okay, so I kind of alluded to this earlier. When it comes to reporting on workload optimization results and that we've achieved, it really wasn't Parker. And comparing that to rate optimization data is extremely tangible. I made this set of commitments. I've got an inventory of the commitments I've made. I can see the utilization of that commitment. I can see the savings associated with that commitment. And I can report my list price was this, my actual cost was this, therefore I saved this, right? And I think kind of the unfortunate thing is that when you look at workload optimization, again, it feels very tangible because you're getting what look like very tangible machine level recommendations. It looks like an inventory of all the opportunities I've got, and therefore I make the same assumptions. It's tangible data and I'm going to be able to report on it in a tangible way. The challenge is that it's very ephemeral, right? It comes and goes and changes. And Parker kind of alluded to this at a little bit higher level, that talking just in general, but as we drill down into services, we have an initial state here. All of these services that maybe we're being told are idle, let's make these adjustments to, and everybody goes through and optimizes them. A month later, maybe things have changed. And actually, that wasn't my experience. my experience, we typically see about an 18-month cycle on our cloud migrations. It starts with the migration itself. Maybe that takes 6 months, give or take. And then we go into a stabilization period, right, where a new team who's going to the cloud for the first time, they've just moved their application, they start to grasp how to manage it, and it becomes stable. And then, a year into this journey, they say, boy, we exceeded our budget last year. We need to do something about that this year. And they start going into the optimization phase, right? And they optimize and they bring those dollars down. Great, awesome, you've saved money. And now the question becomes, how long do we count and recognize that optimization benefit for? My first approach was actually very simple. Well, and I'll just use $100 as a nice example. You started out at $100 6 months ago when you finished and entered your stabilization phase. Now you've optimized it down to $85. So as long as you stay under $85, we'll just count that towards your benefit of workload optimization, right? Sounds easy. What happens when they get to $105 instead of $85? Without context, who knows? I'll tell you the context of this particular group is they were using Citrix for VDI and decided to move to Azure VD. And so they went from that 85 to 105 price point because they had a double bubble going on, right? They were running a migration in parallel. And so all of a sudden they lose all of the benefit for their optimization based on that simple formula because of that, and I stopped giving them credit for it. Okay, that's great. So does that mean then the new watermark's $105 and instead of the $100 that they originally started at, and when they finish that migration to AVD and their cost goes back down to $85, now instead of $15 in workload optimization benefit, I get to account for $20 in workload optimization benefit? I think I'm going to ask my engineers to turn on some really big instances for a couple of days and set that watermark really high so that I can take credit for bringing it down, right? So these types of simple models that are looking again at those workload levels don't work really effectively and make it really hard to us report either to the teams themselves or up to leadership who wants to know what is the value that FinOps is bringing to me, what is the tangible benefit, what are the dollars I saved?
And the examples on the screen are kind of some that we've seen, but I'll highlight that middle one because I feel like that's kind of a common one and an easy one. So, we see this all the time. There will be dev resources, they're being used, one of them goes idle, it doesn't get turned off, the FinOps team reaches out and says, hey, that's idle, turn it off, so they do. Now, let's say that costs $1,000 a month. What does that mean? So if I'm a FinOps team and my boss is asking me, what impact have you made? Show me prove to me the value proposition of your position. If a $1,000 idle instance gets turned off, how do I include that in that calculation? Can I say, well, that was $1,000 a month. Okay, cool. So maybe it was idle for a month, we turned it off. Okay, $1,000 a month. Let's just say we agree on that. Can I say it's $12,000 a year? Can I say it's $36,000 in 3 years? Like how long can I calculate that for, right? Because, and then am I tracking it? What if it gets turned back on a week later? Do I go back and then cut my number to only be a week of savings? Will I even notice? What if it has a new resource ID when it gets spun back up? Will I ever catch that? And that's there's other examples on the screen where you might right size something. I've seen it where a FinOps team says, hey, right size this. The team does it and they have it does impact performance. It wasn't probably the right move to make, and so they switch it right back. But does the FinOps team know they did that? So that's kind of one of the big challenges that we see over and over is I can show it's a point in time, right? If we take an action, that is a very point in time. The data is as of that second. But if we're measuring savings, how do I take that decision where we move from this to this and expand that out into something that, yeah, I mean, how do I even know how long to expand it out to? How do I actually put a number together to give to someone?
And the answer, at least the way we've looked at it, is to not even worry about measuring savings, rather focus on KPIs that measure the efficiency of your environment overall. And depending on whether you're pessimistic or optimistic, you might measure waste rather than efficiency, right? It's the same formula turned on its head the other way around. But establishing efficiency KPIs and not just establishing it at the, well, based on XYZ report for the entire organization, we are 97% efficient. Wait, I think it was 27% waste you quoted earlier, so we are 27% wasteful. But get down to specific services, and I'll even go a level beyond that. In fact, I think, yeah, we do have an example coming up, so I'll wait for that example. But set specific optimization goals around specific services and specific aspects of services. And when you're tracking that efficiency, track it in terms of your on-demand cost, not your list price. Because if you track in terms, on-demand or list, which by the way happen to be very close to the same thing, right? Not your discounted price, because if you're applying your discounts that are coming from your rate optimization, your enterprise agreements, et cetera, then did I save that money because I implemented a commitment, or did I save that money because I did the workload optimization effort? And the last bullet that Joe Daly must have took off the slide on me was meet the users where they are with that data. And this is something that I've seen a lot of effectiveness in. If I can get the right KPI and I can present it to the right user at the right place in their process, not in a new workflow at the right time, then it drives action and they're able to start making changes. One example, that's not an example that I'm talking about yet. One example for me, again, working in this kind of distributed space, is spending years, and I kid you not, years, working to make progress. And in times that I was having good progress, being able to say, yes, we made 20% progress on this KPI that we have this year. And what I found was when I was able to get that KPI that was the right KPI, but not in the right place, not in front of the right people, not part of their process, something where they had to reach out and be trained to log into some other system somewhere else to even see what that KPI was, there was no progress, and it was a lot of me chasing people down. But as soon as I put it in front of them in their everyday process, in a single month I made more progress than I made in a year and a half, right? And so getting the right KPIs, again, an efficiency or waste-based KPI here, in front of the right people makes a big difference. And so an example here, I think, I don't remember if you had a storage example earlier, but in this case we're looking at storage. So I might have a goal for the effectiveness, the efficiency of my spend in storage, but I'm going to want to divide that down even lower. I'm going to want to go from the storage level, in this case, down to the block level storage level. And I'm going to want to go below the block storage level and start talking about different characteristics of block storage that I might be setting goals in. So in this case, we said unattached volumes, or I might be looking at the provisioned IOPS, different layers, and I might look here, but this example is a good example. So in our current state, 19% of our monthly block storage spend is on unattached volumes. Feels pretty wasteful to me. And so we could start with that KPI on spend on unattached volumes, which is an aggregation. We're not reporting on a specific volume at this point, right? And turn that then into our goal is to reduce that to 8%. And you may say, James, why not 0%? We'll talk about that in a minute. But then we've got a clear goal that we can march towards, and teams, when they have that in front of them, can see what their unattached volume spend is and start focusing on that specifically. Parker, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, this is what's been really impactful for me and the organizations I've worked with is this. So kind of going back to earlier, if we are working with teams, we're recommending actions, they're taking those actions, I would expect to see this go down, right? If we've got a KPI, what % of our EC2 spend is idle, and we're working at turning off those idle instances, I'd expect to see that KPI go down. So that's where this has worked really well. That's where we can start to show these are the impacts of the actions that we're taking. This is how the FinOps team is driving value. James often compares it to marketing, where you might have, because the thing is, actions are happening all across the organization. We can't say that we alone did this, but what we could say is, hey, we've been tracking this metric. It went from 17 to 20 to 18 to 19. Then we started taking these actions, and now it's 14. And so we can at least start to say that we had an impact on it. There was, again, with marketing initiatives, you don't know that someone bought the thing because they saw the ad. But if sales went up at the same time as an ad went out, you could say that it impacted it. So
there appears to be a strong correlation.
And the cool thing about this too is we said track efficiency, not savings. You can estimate savings from this though. If our idle instant spend went from 20% of our spend to 10, and our over the same time period, our total spend went from 1 million to 2 million, I can say, so at 1 million, 20% was idle, so that's $200,000. At 2 million, 10% is idle, so that's $200,000. So it's the same, right? Like if you looked at that, you'd say, well, that's the same. But the thing is, what if we were still at 20%? Then that 2 million in spend would have been 400,000 of waste, and that's what I want to compare it to. So I'm saying at our 2 million in current spend, we've got it from 20% idle down to 10% idle. So we can estimate. It's basically saying what would our idle spend be if we hadn't taken these steps, if the FinOps team didn't exist, and we can get that KPI back to a savings estimate, which is, we think we've impacted the spend by $200,000 because of the actions that we're putting in place.
Which also kind of helps to eliminate the, cost avoidance versus cost optimization conversation, right? Yes, this does represent both cost avoidance and optimization as a result of this KPI that we're tracking to. So, okay, last thing is accounting for infeasible recommendations. And Parker has a whole bunch of these that he wants to list, but he's been talking too much, I've been talking too much. I'm sure you've all had this conversation with engineers. What are some of the reasons engineers have given you for, I cannot shut that down? I don't know what's depending on that. Okay, that's a good one.
So if it's down, how will it be patched? How will it stay up to date? Right? For the same hour, it's going to take an hour for all the patches to get on there, and then that's going to die.
Yeah, so it will create a security issue because it won't get patched if I turn it down, so I've got to leave it on for security. Yes, I have to have my dev box up 24 hours a day. It's not because I have a follow the sun model, it's because I work 24 hours a day. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of reasons, and everyone can give us a dozen examples of why they've been told, no, we can't make that recommendation. And some of them we laugh about, we joke about. Some of them are legitimate, and it's not our role to make the decision about which of those are or are not legitimate, right? There's a business leadership team that needs to make a decision about what is and isn't legitimate. And so recognizing that there are going to be some recommendations that should legitimately be ignored because it may be an idle resource, but based on business rules, it isn't waste. How do we account for that? And there's kind of two options that we've played with. And having played with a couple of options, I had one opinion, I changed opinions, and we'll get into that later. But the two options that we kind of see is, one accept a certain level of waste, right? And we showed that back here where we said the goal's 8%, not 0%, right? And so we said, yes, business, we've sat down with you, we've understood your needs, and what you're telling us is that 8% of your unattached volumes are legitimately unattached and need to remain for a business purpose, and here's the reason. So that's one option. The other option is to have an exception process where a business unit can identify the reason for that particular waste and flag it. I was on the, hey, let's just take the easy route and just accept that this business unit says they need to have 8% of unattached volumes. That is a business requirement for them. Has anybody ever heard somebody say, I have a business requirement to waste money? That's, okay. So that was where I originally sat, but I have shifted to the right answer is to establish an exception process where resources that have a legitimate business purpose for being idle can be flagged and identified and linked to that purpose and then pulled out of the waste metric because even though they are idle, they don't represent waste. An example of this I'll give you that we've run into is GPU-based resources. Resources that we have to perform processing but are in high demand. And at certain points in time, we've had situations where if we release those resources, they're not available to us 8 hours later when we need to start the process up again, right? And so due to those environmental factors, there was a justification that said, we're going to hold on to these so that we can use them for our needs in 8 hours, even though that means we're having 8 hours of unutilized, wasted spend, right? But that brings up an important point. The environment's ever changing, right? And just because I give you an exception today and I tag that exception and we accept it, doesn't mean that a year from now the environment's going to be the same and that exception should still be in place. So there needs to be a process to review those exceptions and determine whether they're still legitimate. The reason why I believe this is a better option today than the option of just saying, hey, I'm going to accept a certain level of waste, even though it's harder. This takes more work on the FinOps side and even on the solution team, the engineering team side to accomplish this, is the motivation factor. As soon as I tell an engineer or a leader, you only have to be 8%, get to 8% in efficiency. You don't have to get to 0. Somehow, it's not as motivating as when I can tell them the target's 0% and then give them the tools to help them get there. And so I tend to see that I don't ever get to 8%. I sit at 12 or 13% instead, whereas with the exception process, I get that extra 3 or 4%. And so I guess you can do the numbers on that and do the math and say, is that extra 3 or 4%, the effort to do that, worth the value that I'm generating for each of your individual organizations? On my side, that seems to be the case. So I think that brings us to the end of our 4 topics, but not the end of our journey.
Yeah.
And still things we're working on. I think, Parker, you've got some things you're working on your end.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is still active. We're still working through some of these challenges and figuring out the right way to address them. Here's kind of a summary of some of the challenges and solutions we talked about. Just an example of something that I'm still working on figuring out is when sometimes you get those metrics in place. I had a situation recently where we had metrics in place, and then there was a drastic change in spend. Like compute spend dropped about 50% overall for good reason. It was expected. What wasn't expected was all of a sudden all of our efficiency KPIs went way up, and we're still figuring. This is very recent. This is like last week type stuff. We're still trying to figure out, okay, well, obviously we're not way less efficient. So how do we need to adjust these KPIs to where something like that doesn't affect them? And why does it affect them to begin with? And that's part, the on-demand versus actual rate paid is something that could affect that. But anyway, so there's still a lot out there. We'd be interested in hearing from everybody, later. We won't have time now, but if these things resonate with you, if you found different solutions to some of these things, if you have different challenges that we haven't talked about, so feel free to find us after and let's chat about it. We'd love to learn from you.
Yeah, this might be, we don't know what we're doing. Please come and tell us what you've already learned so that we can do it right.
All right.
Okay.
Got like 4 minutes.
All right, so we have time for one, maybe two questions. You know, if I had an exception process, I would have known those unattached volumes were the DR solution. Who has the first question? Boom.
All right, you are talking always about success KPIs. Can you tell me the KPIs you found it customers never got any success, make no progress?
KPIs that we tried that were not successful?
Yes.
I guess I'll say this. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but I will say that happens for sure. I mean, you put something in place. Here's what I think I run into more. It's not that the KPI idea was wrong. It's more the calculation behind it was wrong. But that's part of the whole inform, optimize, operate, improve maturity thing is we put something in place, maybe it's not exact, it doesn't do exactly what we wanted, we figure out why and we make it better. So, I mean, that's part of it. I don't know if I ever get the KPI perfect to begin with.
I would add 2 points, and the first, 3 points. The first one is, the other day I asked my wife, why is our life so perfect? Why have we never had any challenges? And she said, James, it's because you have a very bad memory. And so, you know, I, like Parker, I'm thinking, well, what are some specific examples of failed KPIs? And I don't have one specific KPI, but where I see the failure points are that I don't get the KPI in front of the right people at the right time and in the right place. That's a very common struggle. If I'm putting the KPI in front of somebody who doesn't know how to act on it, can't act on it, who it's meaningful to, or doesn't have the authority to prioritize action on it, then it doesn't matter what KPI I chose. And I had a third one. Again, to my wife's point, I have a very bad memory, so I forget what my other point was, and I'll let you know as soon as I remember.
But I'll say this just real quick. To your point, the KPI where it will fail is if it's not aligned to a business objective. If it's not aligned to that kind of enterprise vision, then don't even use it. Just because it's, you know, it's kind of doesn't add value. It's more noise than value. So.
One more question. Here we go.
What challenges did you face when you What challenges did you face when you transitioned from the individual product spend to the aggregate tracking?
People being used to the old way. So, which is funny because it's objectively worse. But the ideally, as you transition from one method to another, you'd be able to kind of align on the results of both. It'd be really cool if you could say, all right, here's how we're tracking it now. We're going to switch to this KPI version. We measure them both, and hey, look, the numbers are about the same. So we validate that this works. Now let's drop the one and continue with that one. And it doesn't happen because they are different. And the KPI one typically I would say is more accurate, but it can be hard for organizations to accept something new if it doesn't show what they want it to show. If the new one says we're not as good as we thought we were, then they start questioning and saying, well, that must not be as good. So let's just keep the old one. So I'd say that would be the big one.
I think change management, not as in software development lifecycle change management, but people change management is certainly part of it. And I think the other piece of it is it does take more effort than just to simply say, hey, here's a list that was given to me. And so the additional effort, not just involved in the aspects of me going and figuring out things from a centralized FinOps team, but also the extra conversations that I have that frankly are really good because FinOps is about collaboration, right? But everybody's busy. Everybody's been given 100 other priorities. And so that's one of the challenges right there is getting all the right conversations in place.
Thank you so much. James and Parker will be available for more Q&A throughout the conference. You can check them out in the everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.